All right, so today we're going to dive into the life of Samson. Now, he's got to be one of the most perplexing and honestly tragic figures in the entire Hebrew Bible. And his story, it's so much more than just some ancient legend. It's really this deep riddle about power, about weakness, and what divine purpose even looks like.
And really, the question that just hangs over his entire story is this one right here. How could a guy who was blessed with legit divine strength be defined by such deep, personal weakness? It just doesn't seem to add up. And that's the exact paradox we're going to unpack in this explainer.
I mean, Samson's life, it's practically a masterclass in contradiction. The guy's just a walking bundle of stark contrasts. And the source of all that tension, well, it comes down to his most famous attribute.
Okay, so first things first, Samson was known for his unbelievable physical power. We're talking superhuman strength. And this wasn't something he, worked out for at the gym. It was a divine gift, handed to him for a very specific mission, to start shaking things up and challenging Israel's oppressors. But, and this is the huge but, that incredible strength was matched by an equally incredible weakness. He had this profound lack of character, of moral discipline, and that is what created the central, tragic conflict of his entire life.
And this really just lays it all out, doesn't it? It's the core paradox in a nutshell. On one side, you've got this unmatched external power, this divine strength. But on the other side, you see this deep, internal frailty, arrogance, a total lack of discipline. And it's that mismatch that is the absolute key to understanding Samson's story.
Samson's life is just such a powerful illustration of this truth right here. Because having a great gift, that's one thing. But having the character to actually manage it, to steward it properly, that's a whole other ballgame.
So let's dig a little deeper into this. Because this internal struggle, this battle between his gifts and his character, it wasn't just some private thing he was dealing with. It actively got in the way of and even undermined his divine mission. And look, his flaws weren't just random slip-ups. No, they were a direct attack on the sacred Nazirite vows that were supposed to set him apart for God. So instead of being a national deliverer, his actions were almost always driven by these personal, vengeful vendettas, and that stuff just constantly overshadowed his real purpose. And this is where we hit the ultimate irony of his life. Think about it. It was only when he was at his absolute lowest point, blind, his strength gone, grinding grain like an animal in a Philistine prison. That was the moment God's power was most clearly revealed. Why? Because for the first time, maybe ever, he was forced to rely completely on God and not on himself. So you have this insane cycle, right? Incredible strength, followed by spectacular failure, and then this final, desperate act of faith. And what it leaves behind is this really complicated, thought-provoking legacy. So you have to ask, was he a success or was he a failure? Well, as we're about to see, the answer isn't so simple. Yeah, this table breaks it down perfectly. His legacy is completely dual-sided. On the one hand, he was a huge success as a troubler of the Philistines. He caused chaos, he disrupted things, he totally fulfilled that part of his mission. But on the other hand, he failed as the real leader his people needed. He only began the job of delivering Israel, he never finished it. Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all. I mean, when you really look at this messy, complicated, often disastrous life, how in the world does this guy end up being remembered as a hero of faith? It just doesn't seem possible. Right, it seems impossible, but believe it or not, the biblical text itself gives us a really clear and honestly pretty surprising answer that finally solves this central paradox.
And boom, here it is. In the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, there's this chapter people call the Hall of Faith. And right there, among the greatest heroes, is Samson, explicitly listed, no apologies, no asterisks, no footnotes, just Samson, an example of faith.
Seeing his name on that list forces us to wrestle with a really difficult, but absolutely foundational truth. God's ultimate plan doesn't depend on us being perfect. In fact, and this is the wild part, it often moves forward not just in spite of our failures, but sometimes directly through them.
So as we kind of wrap our heads around a story, we can actually pull out some really timeless lessons that are still super relevant today for understanding this whole relationship between our weakness and God's purpose.
All right, lesson number 1 is crystal clear. Gifts and character have to go hand in hand. Samson's incredible strength was just constantly squandered, constantly misused, for one simple reason.
He didn't have the moral foundation to handle it wisely.
The second lesson is about finding power in weakness. I mean, it was only when Samson had everything stripped away from him, his pride, his sight, his legendary strength, that he could finally truly see God. That last prayer he makes, it's this massive shift from relying on himself to being totally dependent on God.
And finally, lesson number 3. Samson's story is just this powerful testament to God's sovereignty. It shows that God can take the disobedient, misguided actions of deeply, deeply flawed people and still use them to move his bigger, unstoppable plan forward.
So in the end, Samson's whole paradoxical life is this really humbling reminder for us. God's ability to get things done in the world isn't limited by the flaws of the people he chooses to work through. Not at all.
And maybe that's the final, most provocative thought to leave you with. True divine power. Maybe it's not just about the big flashy miracles like stopping floods or parting seas. Maybe the real power is the incredible ability to take broken, imperfect individuals and work through them to accomplish a perfect and unstoppable will. It's a lot to think about.